Greetings, damas y caballeros. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us for Feliz Latinidad. I am one of your hostesses, Stephanie Pena, and my lovely co-host, Albert, we're going to get to hear from in just a moment, but we are so glad that you're joining us for just a little bit of holiday cheer. We are so incredibly honored and excited to introduce our first guest. Mr. Lance McDaniel, if you have been around Oklahoma City for even a minute and perhaps dipped a toe in the Oklahoma art scene, you probably already know Lance McDaniel. He is Oklahoma City's treasure, to be honest. But we're going to get to know him a little bit more here in just a moment, specifically his upcoming project. But just a little bit about Lance. Lance is, of course, the writer, producer, and director of Finding Carlos, which is the main project we're going to be talking about today. But Lance is a longtime seasoned filmmaker. He's been a part of over 20 films, 5 of which he's directed. And he's the former executive director of Oklahoma City's award-winning Dead Center Film Festival, recognized throughout the world as one of the best film festivals. And Lance, of course, played a great role in that, but independently of Dead Center is just an incredibly generous creative who has brought so many lives of work to the screen throughout his life here in Oklahoma. So we are so honored to have Oklahoma's treasure and talent, Mr. Lance McDaniel. Welcome, Lance.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Albert. I'm really, really excited to be here. And
well, we're excited to have you.
I think you're perfect to be putting on a show like this. So thank you for including me.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to start with a couple of preliminary questions and let you share just a little bit. The main thing that all of our pandemic productions, anxious listeners and viewers want to know is, who is Carlos and do you ever find him?
Well, that's the best question. Where do we find Carlos? Well, so Finding Carlos is a movie that we filmed in Oklahoma for the last, we filmed it during the pandemic. And it is the project that started because Race Dance Collective, which was founded by Hui Cha Poos, she created a hip hop version of the Nutcracker because she's a lifelong dancer and dance teacher and dance professor. And she wanted to basically offer the music and the dance of the Nutcracker to a wider audience that was not necessarily focused on ballet. So she created this, and she created it around a guy that she had taught at Douglas High School, who basically had kind of turned his life around because of the dance class he took with her.
Oh, wow.
And, his name was Carlos. And so in her version of the Hip Hop Nutcracker, in Race Dance Company's Hip Hop Nutcracker, it is Carlos instead of Clara, like the original Nutcracker. And instead of meeting her uncle Droz, he meets his father for the first time. Wow. And so based on that premise, we created a movie called Finding Carlos. And my God, I'm about to cry already. It's going to be a messy one.
We're in for a treat.
But what is amazing is that when she created it based on this guy named Carlos. And now Carlos is the director of admissions for Langston University here, which is a historic Black college here in Oklahoma. And he is one of the stars of our movie. So we gave him a role, and it was hard because we had a 16-year-old amazing student named Maximus White playing Carlos, and then we also had the real Carlos, and so it'd be like real Carlos, fake Carlos. But no, so her story, I've been going to it seemingly all 8 years, and it has just been, it's amazing to see the stories that you can tell through dance, and it is amazing what happens when you give people the opportunity to tell their own stories and to dance their own dances, and so what happens, so how hers worked is, they would go into public high schools in Oklahoma City, and I think they would do about 8 a year, Capitol Hill, Southeast, all of it. And they would do a semester-long class of hip-hop dancing or whatever the style was. And then at the end of the semester, the Christmas show would be this hip-hop Nutcracker made from the dances that they taught in the schools, in all the public high schools. And so as Carlos and his father are going around, that's what they're going. And then it also included dancers from the Race Dance professional group as well. And she came, and so Hui Cha came to me in July and said, Lance, we are not going to be able to do our Nutcracker because we will not be able to go into the schools, and we cannot, we can't lead classes inside any schools, and we can't go ahead and have a massive show for thousands of people. Would you consider helping me make a movie about it? And I'm like, done. And at the same time, I got an opportunity to apply for, there was a mental health grant process going on that they basically said, would you apply to, a friend of mine said, I think you should apply and see if they would choose making a movie. And I applied for this grant, and every other person that applied, and there were multiple people that did because there was a bunch of grants, every other person was like, I'm going to set up a commission to talk about the stigma related to addiction. And what we said we were going to do was to create a piece of art using enough diversity of people that made the art piece itself, that we could start a conversation about mental health, anxiety, and addiction, and get people talking about it in a way that an ad campaign would. But because it's a movie, and now it's going to be an album and all this stuff, and we have 70 dancers from across Oklahoma, and Cheyenne Arapaho, and jazz dancers from Tulsa, that gives us a platform to reach different people that might not be hearing it. And in an age of anxiety right now, where everyone's stuck at home, and so if you're naturally anxious, it's just even worse. We felt like that was a good message, and so did they. And so we got the grant, and that allowed us to make this movie. And because of COVID, we kept a very small group. So our crew was about 13 people when normally you'd have 70. And that forced every awesome person we hired to not only do amazing top level work, but also be their own assistant, because with 13 people, guess what? You don't have an assistant. So, right. And then the cast, we didn't do an open casting call. Our goal was to hire dancers, theater actors, and musicians who could not be hired otherwise because live performances were shut down. And so we didn't actually audition a lot of film actors who were already working, because a lot of films are going on right now here in Oklahoma. Sure. And so we provided a platform for primarily dancers and theater actors to come and play. And it was amazing, because every step of the process, because we started it in July and we will be in theaters in 2 weeks, in December, or 3 weeks, we had to collaborate on every step of the process, and that's what made it magic.
That's amazing.
I'm impressed with all that. That's beautiful. Like, that touches my heart, because I work in the substance abuse and mental health field. And so this is very near and dear to me, and just kind of hearing you talk about the diversity you're bringing to it and all the elements you're incorporating really is amazing, especially throwing in with the holidays and incorporating the hip hop culture and the diversity of people of color. Like, I'm here for this. And just going with that, like, what would you say was just that key important thing that you thought about when you thought about mental health? Like, what did you want to drive home? Like, what message were you trying to provide to the community with this film?
Thank you. That is, and that is the whole message is, you are not alone. No matter what, someone else is going through what you're going through. And oh my goodness. And so it's been interesting creating something that is so fun. And when you see it, it is really fun. But the underlying point is, boy, the world is so hard for so many people. And can you use a piece of art of any sort, whether it's a sculpture or a painting or a mural, to get people to open up their eyes and realize that there is hope out there, and that there is a positive, there is something positive that could be gained by reaching out and telling someone that you have an issue. And so what I'm so curious about is that, and of course I've seen the movie now 37,000 times because we're doing the color and sound and everything else. Every time I cry, because ultimately it is about this father who helps his sons realize that he is not alone, and so the process was fascinating, because we got to interview 11 different advocacy groups, and that was like suicide prevention and bipolar, and so it was a variety of very specific organizations, and most of which included people that were going through either that specific mental health issue themselves or had a child. And so none of it was I'm the secretary of blah, blah, blah. That's never heard, every single person it was so real for. And it gave us a challenge of how do we tell an honest version of a story, version of the story of a kid who is struggling and his parents are addicts and one has made it and one's now not making it. And so, and how do you do it honestly? And what is enough to be honest and what is too much? And so, suicide is, we talked long and hard about, do you even ideate or talk about or include language related to suicide in an hour and a half movie about mental health? And that's something that we absolutely did not. And we talked a lot about, what was the 13 Reasons Why, or the show on Netflix, where it's like, you can't interpret how people are. You cannot anticipate how a 10-year-old, how a 15-year-old, or how a 50-year-old is interpreting what you're saying, no matter how careful you are. And so if you throw out a topic as serious as that, you have to have solutions within the piece itself for that. And so that I don't know, I went there, other than that was the kind of thing that I would not have known or not have thought about had I not gotten to speak with 11 different advocacy groups who are full-time providing services for mental health and for all of those issues. So for me, it was the most eye-opening, awesome thing. And my co-writer, Melissa Scaramucci, is an endless capacity of empathy and understanding. And so us going through this process, we cried a ton, but we were able to whittle that down into, we also are telling a super fun movie that's for the holidays. So we can't just be like, and so I don't know what the question was, but that's my answer.
No, definitely. The you are not alone is so important, because like you said, a lot of people do feel alone, and it's a struggle that many people don't know who to turn to. And especially in the communities of color, that's a huge common theme where the stigma is so real and we don't talk about it. We're told, we don't share with neighbors, oh, you're just crazy. And it's just very toxic. What kind of similarities did you find in doing research for this film when working with the people of color and mental health, or even substance abuse?
Well, so that was that. Basically, so I think the story we wrote was not like Mike Pence with this freaking fly. Same agent. It's like, by the way, I'm nothing like Mike Pence in real life. But so we talked about that a ton with the advocacy groups, and what do you highlight and how much, and so do you get into, what are all the issues facing individual communities? And so what we decided to do was just allow the people that we hired within those communities to help drive the narrative. For example, Hui Cha Poos is a woman who basically created the original and asked me, kind of invited me to create a movie about it. And then I brought in Melissa, and one thing we were talking about is that each of the songs would allow a different ethnic group or cultural group to reinterpret one of the songs from the Nutcracker. And so the Chinese tea song for the Nutcracker, and they're all very famous, and it sounds awesome. And our composer Bobby Moffett Jr. from Tulsa is spectacular. But so for that one example, so she had told me the story that she had just gone to the grocery store, and these people were yelling at her, "Go back to China, go back to China," and she was like, "And I'm Korean." And so in the movie, and this has happened literally while we're writing the screenplay, and so in the movie, she's the character, and she was like, so our look at the Chinese dance for the Nutcracker is the fact that all Asians are called Chinese when there's 37 different cultures of Asian. And so in the dance that they do, it starts with a Chinese song and then goes into an Indian Bollywood song, and then a Kazakhstan song, and then they have a Japanese girl, and then it all turns into K-pop. And so each of the different cultures basically got to influence how the story addressed the racism they were talking about. And it's not all racism, but it is just different, so for example, the Mexican culture one, which is of course the most exciting and all, and is that Spain had, so it's a Spanish song, It's the Spanish chocolate song in the Nutcracker, and so it's now a Mexican coquilla song that it is. Prior to Spain invading Mexico, there was still chocolate. There was, right. And so that is something that is indigenous to the people there that was not brought over from Europe. And so when they stomp in the dances, that is getting back to their Mayan culture and back to the earth of where that came from. And so that's what their story's about. And so all of which is stuff that I got to learn along the way by being a part of this. And so the whole goal was, if you allow people to tell their own stories and allow people to create their own dances related to this, and just say, hey, we're going to use the Nutcracker's music as a through line, but we're going to allow you to interpret it and let us know what is interesting about it. Then and so yeah, so I think it worked great. And what was great with the folkloric group that we, and Adelita's awesome. It like her group was fabulous, and they were willing, and she was willing to allow Layla Rickman, our actress, to join, and it is so seamless. I mean, Layla must be a fabulous actor or dancer too, because they are so well trained and so specific. Yes. I mean, like, not a hair out of place. I mean, like me.
Yes, that is awesome. Yeah, she is amazing. And just my final question, I just want to ask you, why do you feel 2020 really needs this film?
Well, so 2020 is the reason so if it weren't for a pandemic, we would be having a live version of the Hip Hop Nutcracker. I might have tried, we've talked about doing a film, but it probably wouldn't have, and so we wouldn't have had this topic. One of our lead actors, Michael Andreas, who plays the father, Dros, he was on Broadway in a soldier's play, which was nominated for 7 Tonys, and that got shut down because of the pandemic. And he's from Moore, Oklahoma, so he was home in Moore. Hui Cha saying, "Hi, I think there's amazing actors there." So we only really auditioned 1 or 2 people per role, 3 for the lead, and no more than that. And most of them were through the dance company because we were trying to employ the dancers. And it was just, so nothing could have happened the way it did if it weren't for a pandemic. And to me, so 2020, but specifically the pandemic. And because of that, we were able to create something super positive and magical. And I also think people were so willing to come together and do this, even though, if you're the Cheyenne Arapaho, break dancers that we have in this, and they are just amazing. And they're world famous. So like in their world, they don't need us. They don't need our movie. They don't need Finding Carlos. They don't need me. They are these world renowned dancers that happen to believe in the mission of abstinence as far as drugs and alcohol. And they are fighting addiction through learning traditions through the Cheyenne Arapaho tribe. And so when we were able to express what the film was actually about, every single time it hit someone on an emotional core, because they're like, yeah, anxiety is bothering a lot of people right now. Or yeah, I know a lot of addicts. I know a lot of people who could use a positive message about mental health. And so I think at the end of this craziest year on record, for me at least, that would be a terrible term, I'm sorry, the wildest year on record, to provide something uplifting that is inclusive, but not because we forced it, but because that was the story. The story was, how do different cultures interpret this piece of art together? And so I feel like this is a very specifically 2020 movie. And to me, the anecdote for the fact that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and there is hope, and no one is alone. And we are now finding ways as a society to come back together and heal those divisions and all of that. And I think this movie will be a part of that positive healing.
I love that. Thank you so much, Lance. Albert, thank you so much for helping us talk about the purpose and the positivity behind this film. My questions are centered around the production and the people. So let's kind of piggyback on the people. You've already mentioned some of our favorite people. So Lance and I have had the pleasure of, it's been my pleasure for sure, and my great honor to work with Lance on a couple of films with some of our
Stephanie, don't be shy. Stephanie is my muse.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I look forward to future projects.
Exactly.
1000%. You mentioned some of our favorite people who we've worked with in past projects and that sort of thing. I want to talk about the fact that this was very much a female-led, really team of people. We've talked, of course, about Hui Cha Poos. We've talked about Melissa Scaramucci. I want to talk about why was it so important to work with these incredibly talented team of women. You've talked a little bit, of course, about the diversity, which, by the way, really quick, thank you so much for allowing people of color and those of us who represent different marginalized communities to tell our stories collectively and respectively, because as you know, when we are forfeited that opportunity, sometimes the story gets told wrong. I mean, just being very honest, even with the best of intentions, even with people who really want to do their storytelling very authentically and genuinely, sometimes there's an opportunity to really get it wrong. So thank you so much for that opportunity and working collectively with these different communities. But again, so going back to that, why was it important for you to work with this incredible group of women? And yeah, why was it important to work with them again? I know, I'm sorry, one last thing. I know that you've worked with Race Dance Collective in the past on a previous award-winning film. So obviously that was a positive experience. But yeah, so kind of piggyback on that experience and then working with this team of women.
Well, thank you very much. And so over the last several years, since I've done, so the last feature I did, I believe, was Oh Brother, that starred Miss Stephanie Pena as our heroine. And that was written by Melissa Scaramucci as well. And then she and I also did the Homecoming trilogy. And then Hui Cha Poos and I did Swirl, the Homecoming trilogy, and now this. And basically, once he said, we were actually at a meeting in the pool because it was during the pandemic, and it was like, I think like June maybe. And she was like, I need to talk to you about something. I was like, well, I'm only accepting pool meetings because I need to be surrounded by chlorine.
Right.
And, which is my new go-to. And she was like, awesome. I don't have a pool. I'm on my way. And so we're talking about she was telling me the fact about that she was not going to be able to do, so it was the whole conversation about them not being able to put on the hip hop Nutcracker, and could we do a film about it? And I was telling her that separately I had been talking to this mental health about, this health group about the possibility of getting funding for mental health. And we're like, well, couldn't we do that? And I'm like, oh yes, well, great. Well, so let's call Melissa. And so from the very first second, we knew it was going to be the three of us producing it. And I also knew that it was what I was signing up for was creating a story that would really optimize the people that worked with he as part of the Race Dance Collective. And as you can imagine, the Race Dance Collective is very, very female and also very, very diverse. It's not all female, it's probably a third guys, but super diverse, and naturally so. And so it was never a question about we knew the dancers and the dances, and because the premise, so I mean, I very quickly was like, well, since we can't have these high schools, what if we did different dance groups all over Oklahoma? And so we're like, well, if COVID would allow, what if we had like an Indian group in Anadarko and a blah, 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 blah. And so that's kind of how we brainstormed it, and what was amazing. And then we go looking around and we see these, they're called the Hostiles, Hastyles, and they're the breakdancers from the Cheyenne Arapaho tribe, and they are just, they're greatest. And so then we rewrote it. But what was interesting, so that we rewrote the story for Cheyenne Arapaho instead of the initial, because that changed the names, that changed some of the custody. So the story changed based on what was the actual specific Native American tribe, and not just like, oh, we have natives. It's like, okay, well, no, that's not how it works. So, so at every step, it was awesome because you just by virtue of the topic, it had to. But so then we hired Amy Janes and Kim Mott as our production managers. And Amy Janes has started the school, the Oklahoma Academy of Film and Film and Television. And she started with her husband and Melody Garneau, and then Richard Janes. And then Kim Mott is typically a kind of a documentary producer, and she has been a total superstar. So the two of those women really kind of ran our production for us. And then my goal, and I've worked on a million movies, as have you. And one thing that is true about movies and changing, but that it is 90% white guys.
Sure.
You go out to O-Trip, and it's not all, but it's a lot, and it's just like, and there's now women grips, and of course that's totally not true and blah, 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 but it is also true. it is also true that 90% of the people in the industry are white guys. And so our goal with this was, okay, how do we, if we're giving all these acting opportunities to dancers, we also need to kind of open it up and start and I don't think it's fair for a group, a super diverse group of artists to look up and see a group of white guys filming them, you know, and it's just like, no, that didn't feel right. I mean, I can't obviously change that I'm white or whatever, but what I can do is proactively try to hire. And so not every position, you know, obviously, so Jacob Burns, who was our cinematographer, and Dov, our camera. But then after that, I think every single person was a person of color or was or you know, woman, female or person of color. And that was intentional, and it allowed us to you know, and so our makeup artist Tatiana had already moved to Atlanta, but was an Oklahoma native that just hadn't been getting as much work there and was getting a lot there. Well, now she's come back. She's on 2 features since she worked on our movie, and she is just freaking awesome, you know. And so basically, we hired a diverse group of people that created magic together, and it was intentional, but it was not like, oh, we're hiring worse people, you know. It was not that at all. It was, we're intentionally hiring people that reflect the diversity of the cast and the story that we're also trying to tell, and that allowed everyone to feel like they were part of something intentional and meaningful in all of it. So to me, that was awesome. And what is so fun, and I don't know if you asked about Layla a minute ago, but
yeah,
what was amazing, so Layla comes in and auditions, and is just, she has a spark that just lit the camera up, even when we're just holding a phone as our camera, you know, and she's auditioning. And we weren't doing it secret, but kind of, because we're like, okay, there's a pandemic, we can't be like open casting for the new Annie, you know. It's like, no, we need to invite 2 or 3 people that are related dancers. And she came in, and what's funny is that there are a couple other girls. One ended up going back to Mexico, moving. And then the other young woman, turns out, goes to high school with the lead and the other, and Layla, and we put her in another scene. So the girl that did not get the role, we ended up creating another scene at that Mexican bakery, which was delicious, and that Adelita's mom, Hope, found for us. So.
Yes. I love that so much. I want to interject a couple of really quick things. Something that is really unique that you just touched on and has been my personal experience. So I've been very blessed to be an Oklahoman, grow up in Oklahoma. A lot of Latinos who are around my age, if you grew up in Oklahoma City and you're Latino, we all kind of know each other and have worked together. Adelita and I have known each other for 20 something years. And we're going to have an opportunity to have a conversation with Adelita at a
Great.
So, and we'll loop all of this together in.
She'll give you the real scoop.
She will give you the real scoop, absolutely. Adelita is a tremendous talent and an incredibly kind, generous person, as you know, and so is her mom, Hope. So we're excited to continue our conversation with them and others surrounding this project. But something that you said really stood out to me that just dawned on me. So my background with Adelita and other Latino performers in Oklahoma City has been that, fortunately, a lot of the directors and producers of live performance stage shows have been people who look like us, right? Yes. So one of the common threads between Adelita and I and other community performers, Latino performers, has been, as you know, Adelita's group is a part of the Everything Goes Dance company, which was founded by my best friend, Shannon Calderon Primo. She's in heaven now, dancing and looking upon us. But what she birthed all those years ago and all the branches of her work and her passion as a female Latina entrepreneur, I know it just touches her and ignites her feet as she's dancing in heaven to see how the community just continues to branch and that sort of thing. So it's really amazing to me that somebody who looks like us, talks like us, acts like us, you know, helped birth all these wonderful things. What's interesting is that while we absolutely celebrate that, and while it has definitely been my experience, not only my personal experience, but my observation that as stage performers, we've been able to have leadership that does mirror us physically and ethnically and culturally and that sort of thing. As you touched upon, that has not been the experience nearly as much in film. So what excites me about what you're sharing with us is that for potentially the first time, a lot of people, I think, will be some pioneering efforts to for performers who of course are both stage and screen, but for performers to be able to work with people who do represent them in a very meaningful way that perhaps they weren't able to have that opportunity previously. So that makes me feel very emotional because, again, circling back to what we talked about earlier, being able to tell our stories authentically, it's just really exciting to be able to share those stories through the lens of those who really truly do represent us, you know, on a whole other level. So that in and of itself is so exciting, and I hope that that will only continue, and I'm sure that it will. So thank you for kind of helping highlight that.
Well, no, thank you. And it's interesting because I do, you know, I do, you know, Rogelio Amazia and Nora and you know, Kyle Kawagaris, there are, and Laurent Chapman. So there are a lot of filmmakers, non-white filmmakers that are doing great work. So it's not meant to say that, but what it really is that when you look at OCCC, you know, when you look at any college, I mean, like just the numbers of people going through that program. And so it is, I think you have to be intentional. And then once you give people an opportunity to show how great they are, then it is great. And to be fair, if you have an all, like our primary cast is all Black, right? So I would say like of the top 7 roles, I would say 5 are Black, you know, and then 2 are Latino, and you know, and as far as just in order of character.
Sure.
And so it wouldn't make sense not to have a Black makeup artist or a Black hair stylist. You know, it's just like, okay, why wouldn't you just, why guess? Why not just do that? You know, and so I think that's where it started. And then it was like, okay, well, great. This is possible. We're meeting super talented people. And you just feel like, to me, it felt like the most natural thing on earth because it made the most sense. And so, and then it just went out from there. But it's also very easy because Race Dance Collective is so naturally diverse.
Exactly.
At every one of the production meetings before we even hired a single person, it was totally diverse. So you're like, okay, well, great. It's not going to have to be anything for us. It's just, these are the people we know and we're hiring.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing. And that's what I'm the most excited to see reflected in the film. One of the many things I'm very excited to see because, and I know Albert can speak to this as well. We can all speak to this from whatever communities we represent personally. There is always a distinction that is very apparent, whether someone is just trying to check a box, right? Versus it is so important that this representation is authentic. And again, not just because trying to mirror, but the natural relationships. I mean, you've you know, illustrated that for us throughout this whole conversation. These are natural relationships. You didn't go up to a specific group and was like, hey, I need to check a box. Would you be interested? These were natural relationships that evolved, and we get to see come to fruition on screen. So I'm super excited about that. Lance, if you'll kind of share with us, you spoke about it being a 13-person crew, which blows my mind because obviously, as you and I have been on set together with many more than that, you know, obviously that's usually a much bigger team. And then obviously the relationship that being COVID compliant has played in all of this. If you'll kind of speak to that, and then if you don't mind, we'll sort of segue into, speaking of COVID compliant, how can we see the film while continuing to be, you know, COVID compliant and very careful. But obviously we want to talk about how we can engage this film. So if you don't mind, please share those.
Perfect. So, so first of all, the 13-person crew, I think probably the person who got most screwed over is your friend and mine, Lance Rivas, who is a spectacular gaffer. But we were saying, okay, hey, we're shooting, you know, 11 dance numbers, you know, 1 million scenes the first 2 weeks so we can have more time for the dance numbers. And you get a staff of 0 to light the whole thing. And I needed to look amazing. Sure. And so it was fun. It was fun to see how Lance and Jacob and their team, because then Tatiana and Sharon and then Rachel Grant-Meyer on the other side were kind of, you know, the art and makeup and wardrobe. And they, it was just, it required a ton of collaboration between departments, and it also required a complete lack of ego. And as you know, I am not without flaw. And so what's hard as a perfectionist and a little bit like I'm in charge, you had to let that go. You have to let that go. And I remember because I let that go better. No, I'm still, controlling whatever, but I let it go enough that I feel like people got to try things and achieve things that were super fun. And I don't know if you noticed in the trailer, but the Sugar Plum Fairy has gold plates as eyeshadow.
Love it.
Guess who wouldn't have thought of that?
Who are you talking to? You think I wouldn't notice gold plate eyeshadow? Come on.
But so that only happened because I hired someone tons cooler than me, Tatiana, and she was so much more in touch with what would be fabulous and not just expected.
Sure.
It happened with every single person. That happened with Sharon with the hair. So every single time they're like, well, what about this instead of what you thought? And you're like, oh, well, of course, that's so much better. So it allowed, so having that small crew allowed for a lot of interaction that I think sometimes if you've got a 7-person makeup artist, the person doing the eyeshadow may not be having those, in-depth conversation with the director and producer about the eyeshadow. And because we had a small team, we got to hear all the juicy details of why these other artists were making the movie better because they were given the space to do so. And the other thing we felt very strongly about was we cannot get anybody sick. I have been quarantined at home for 4 months before this, and we're just not going to do it. So I don't know if you know Perrin Smith, Shannon's husband. He started he's 3 Mile, I think is 3 Mile Productions, is a COVID company, and we spent, and this is not his fault, we spent thousands and thousands of dollars because we had rapid tests for everybody once or twice a week. We would go in and he would go in and disinfect every single location before we got there. It was like Fort Knox, no guest, no, every lunch was individually bagged. You had to set 6 feet from each other. So it was both a little bit of a pain and the most relaxing thing ever because you felt safe. And all of us had been at home, and so to go to work and feel like, oh, great, these 15 people are taking it super seriously. Everyone has on a mask. Everyone has on a shield. We allowed the budget that it took to make it as safe as possible. And then we also had a small crew that was staying home on the weekends instead of having fun because they believed that the 4 weeks that we could do that, and that was a real pain for me because I'm a pretty social person. So I watched a lot of Netflix.
Of course.
And so you're probably wondering, where can I see this magical mystery movie?
Yes.
Dying to know.
Yes, definitely.
I heard it. So what we are planning on is, so what's happening is we will be in 12 theaters or 12 towns in different theaters, and that includes Oklahoma City and Tulsa, but also Tishomingo and Alva and Durant, and so we will release that schedule in the next week. And the reason we're waiting is because we're making sure that every place that we've agreed to film at is going to be COVID safe and has the procedures that make sense. And so we get it. There's a pandemic, and it may mean that only 22 people can go to each screening in Ada or each screening in Alva, but those 22 can go and it'll be there all month. So the plan is that we will be in those theaters for the month of December, and they're going to decide how much they play it or how often, all that stuff. We will also be on Dead Center's virtual cinema, and so that'll make it accessible to anybody in Oklahoma. And then we will have some exciting TV announcements coming soon.
We can't wait.
Yes.
That is so exciting.
And so that will be it will start on Friday, December 4th. And run through the end of the year.
Awesome.
And it's an 82-minute movie. It is appropriate for the family. It is about a kid who's overcoming a few things, and so to overcome something, we have to show a couple of those. So there is a little bit of underage drinking, but not all of it has consequences that are dealt with in a positive and reinforcement.
Love that.
I love it.
And do we talk about how cute Layla Rickman is and that her mom, Marty?
Of course. Marty is a part of the Oklahoma Latino landscape. Like I said, just like Shannon and our friends at Everything Goes Dance Studio, and so many others who we are so excited. We just are so excited collectively, not just as the Latino community, as of course Albert and I are a part of, but we as the Oklahoma City community, arts supporting community, are so incredibly excited about this film. I think one of the most unique takeaways from this conversation for me is how brilliant, generous, and open you and your team have had to be able to create something that is incredibly meaningful, incredibly relevant to this time in terms of having the sensitivity, the empathy, the compassion, to have this conversation about mental health that couldn't be more imperative during the pandemic. But that's also fun, celebrating the Nutcracker production in and of itself that has been a part of the Oklahoma City holiday tradition, you know, for so long. And then again, incorporating all of these different beautiful aspects of the Oklahoma City community and specific cultures and groups and that sort of thing. So I just cannot wait to see it all together. Of course, we loved the trailer, so incredibly excited to see more. Lance, you are Oklahoma City's treasure. There's just no other way of putting it. We cannot thank you enough for your time and your talent, and we are so excited to celebrate this film, everything that it represents, and the incredible team who made it happen.
Well, thank you. And I do want to say one little thing about Adelita, because so I mentioned earlier with the Native American deal, we didn't even come up with names. It was like Native American dad, Native American son, because we're like, well, you can't have a Cherokee name and then go out and hire, you know, a Seminole actor, and you know, so we were trying to be conscious of all that stuff. And so I, of course, super good in that area, go over and I'm meeting with Adelita, and we're like, here's the song, because she shows me the dance. And I'm like, here's the song. And she goes, well, no, this dance is from Veracruz, and it's not really a trumpet-based deal. Like, they're more of a, you know, more of a harp and this. And it was this fascinating conversation that every single culture has so many specific, fascinating differences within it. And it was so fun, because I'm like, oh yeah, that's what our movie's about. And so every single step. And so she was just spectacular to work with. And once we saw her doing her rehearsal, because she was not a character in the movie until we saw one of her rehearsals, and we're like, oop, we got to rewrite that. We need her in every single scene, because she was just magic. She was like, I mean, like she was creating controlled magic with those young women and men. And it was like, that's what this is. And so we created a character around her. So all of a sudden, Jorge, the character Jorge, then had a wife, Adelita, that he had moved home from New York because he loved her so much. And so that's her. But she was just magic. And she, you know, I think almost everyone we got to partner with on this, but Adelita was in particular just delightful for me and very eye-opening, because she was like, yeah, different states in Mexico are using different instruments. You can't just throw a trumpet and assume I want a mariachi band. I'm like, real good point. Now I know. You know? So, yeah, well, thank you so much for including me. And Finding Carlos will be out the month of December all across Oklahoma.
Absolutely. And just for everybody who is engaged with us on this conversation, please know that Albert and I will be posting all of the different details on how to engage the film online, in theaters. Of course, once that schedule is published, we will share that. We'll also be sharing ways to follow up and continue the conversation with some of our favorites that we've mentioned, how you can support Race Dance Collective, specifically how you can support Adelita's Mexican Folklorico group, who we're going to have a conversation with Adelita. We'll share that. And also, we cannot end this conversation without giving a shout out to our dear, dear friend, another Oklahoma treasure, JB.
Yes.
We're going to have
the narrator of our movie.
Exactly. So we look forward to talking more, hopefully have a conversation with JB. But obviously he plays a role. Lance, just real quick, will you talk about JB's role, because we adore him?
I sure will. So JB has been a very good friend of mine for the last several years, as well as you all. And I've always wanted to put him in something. And so what we decided very early was that we wanted to open this and have a narrator, kind of like a Shakespeare play, that you would tell the story up front and then allow the story to unfold. And so he is our wrapping narrator. And so he comes in throughout the movie, kind of giving context to what's going on. And he was, as always, super talented and just a delight to work with. And then he is also helping us produce all the music for the movie.
That's so cool.
So he's been, as always, a godsend and so easy to work with. And of course, everyone loves working with him. So it makes it very, very easy.
Of course. Well, thank you again so much. Muchísimas gracias. We are so excited to engage this film. Again, we'll be sharing all the details on how you can engage the film